Thank you for taking the time to join today for an update. My name is Anna Shepherd Jones, and I'm in the professional learning section at the State Department. And I primarily support the work that's tied to this new law and this new program that we have in place, starting with the 24-25 school year. That's for all of our principals and assistant principals across the state of Alabama. So, this new law is called the School Principal Leadership and Mentoring Act. We call it the Principal Act for short. And this new program is called the APLDS program, and that stands for the Alabama Principal Leadership Development System. So, whenever you see that logo to the right, that's usually tied to the Principal Act or APLDS program. So, we'll go ahead and get started. I just want to remind you that we had information sessions for superintendents and the district contacts for Principal Act and APLDS program. We had sessions in August and also sessions in September. You can find a recording of those sessions and the presentation materials by going to alabamaprincipals.org. And what you should see at the top is a tab that says presentations. You click that and it will take you to that information. If you're not familiar with that website, I encourage you to bookmark it and share it with your principals and APs, because that's going to be a one-stop shop where you can find everything related to this new law and this new program. So alabamaprincipals.org, you're going to hear me refer to that quite a bit. All right, so today we're going to talk about the evaluation system, this new APLDS evaluation system, those deadlines. Some have already come and passed, and then we'll have some deadlines later in the school year, so I want to go over that. I also want to talk about the professional learning requirement, give you some reminders about that and just some updates. We'll also talk about this new framework that's going to be in place to accompany these new leadership standards that we have in place starting this year. So I'm going to show you an excerpt of the framework, what it's going to look like, and we'll roll this out throughout the year. Okay, and I always just like to start with the goal of this APLDS program and our measures of success, because I know this is new for everybody and we're still just trying to learn what this new law and this new program is. So ultimately, the goal of the program is that we're wanting to increase the effectiveness of all of our school administrators so that we're seeing those improved academic outcomes for each and every one of our kids. We know that our school administrators have a tremendous impact on the success of our students. And so we're really wanting to build up their effectiveness and build up their capacity as school leaders so that we're seeing that needle move. How do we know that this program is in fact working? What are those measures of success? So this is what's laid out in the law. The law says that we know this program is going to be successful when we look at these three things, and we'll be looking at this data from year to year. The first thing that we're going to be looking at are principal retention rates. You know the job is incredibly hard, and so we really want to build up the effectiveness, like I said, of our school administrators through this program, but then keeping them there in that leadership position, in particular at that school, so they can maximize their impact. So that's data we'll be looking at from year to year. Are we building them up, and are they staying in that leadership position? The next thing we'll be looking at is school climate. So for this, think in terms of a survey that will disseminate statewide, probably in the springtime. You're used to doing that anyway, as you're probably working on your ASIPs every year. And then lastly, we'll look at student outcomes. And specifically, we'll be looking at two report card indicators, achievement and growth. So this is the data that we'll collect and we'll look at every year to see, is this program in fact working? And we'll be reporting this data to the legislators when they're making the decision if they're going to continue to fund this program, including the continuation and funding those stipends. All right, so that's what we'll be focused on and data we'll be collecting. All right, so let's talk about what's new this year. What is new for the 24-25 school year? Well, a lot. There's a lot being rolled out for this first year of implementation of the law and program. So first, we have a new set of leadership standards for our principals and APs. These new standards are called the Alabama Standards for School Leadership. The design team did a phenomenal job of crafting these new standards. The design team is a group of leaders from across the state of Alabama who are coming together to develop all these different components of this APLDS program, including those new leadership standards. So they really focused on, hey, what do the principals and assistant principals need to really hone in their focus on the most in order to move the needle and see that improvement, based off of what we know from research and based off of what we know from best practices. So they're a really good set of standards and very clear to understand. This another component of this program that's new this year is a new principal mentoring program that we have in place for our newly employed first-time principals. And so these are for principals who are brand new to the principalship. They've never done it before. So they've never done it in another state or even another district within Alabama. They've never been in the principalship. And so this is a great opportunity to support them. And if you want to know more about it, you can also go back to the alabamaprincipals.org website. And I talked a little bit more about it during the September session when we were going through some updates at that time. Now, another component is a new evaluation system that starting this year is replacing Lead Alabama for our principals and assistant principals. So just like before with Lead Alabama, where they went to AIM, they clicked on that TE tile and they were able to access Lead Alabama. Same process, you can still find this new evaluation system there. So they're still going to the AIM portal, clicking on that TE tile, and go into that APLDS evaluation system, which they can find by looking for that logo at the bottom of the slide here. Now, this evaluation system is required for all of our principals and assistant principals, and we talked about that in an earlier session too, that we're using this evaluation system as our platform for tracking principals and APs participation in the program and successful completion of the program. So that is required in order for them to receive the stipend. I do want to lift up, though, that Lead Alabama is still available and optional to districts if for your district administrators if you want to use it. Something else that's new is a state-approved list of high-quality professional learning, and our principals and assistant principals will need to complete at least 30 hours from that state-approved list. And then lastly, we have a new framework. It's called the Alabama Principal Leadership Framework. It's designed to accompany these new leadership standards, and I'll talk to you more about that later in the session and just give you an excerpt and show you what to anticipate it'll look like and how it can best be used. But we'll be having professional learning in place later in the school year as we roll out this new framework. All right, so let's recap what are the requirements for that stipend, right? So this is an annual stipend, always going to be pending legislative appropriations, but an annual stipend that's going to work as a one lump sum stipend once our principals and APs have successfully completed all program requirements. Now, these are the program requirements for the stipend, okay? So starting with the 24-25 school year. Now, when we look at the timeline for fully implementing the Principal Act and fully rolling out the APLDS program, it's not going to be for another 5 years. So the program requirements are going to increase over time as we fully roll this out. So it does have a long runway. It's got 5 years. So it's not going to be fully rolled out until 2029-30. However, these are going to be the program requirements starting the 24-25 school year for the next couple years. Okay, so the stipend starts this year. It's just that as we roll out different components of the program, those program requirements are going to increase over time to keep getting that stipend. All right, so first couple years, all principals and assistant principals will need to complete all steps of that APLDS evaluation system. They'll also need to complete at least 30 clock hours of high-quality professional learning from that state-approved list. Now, I'm going to back it up just a little bit and quickly review that evaluation system. We talked about this in an earlier session as well. But there are 4 steps to the evaluation system. Step 1, really simple. You're just going to indicate, your principals and APs will just indicate what is their school administrator position. Am I an assistant principal? And if I'm a principal, I'm going to select, am I a newly employed first-time principal or am I an existing principal? And that's because you have different requirements in order to get the stipend. And so based off of what you select, is going to filter to meet your needs, right? So it's going to filter to what you should be completing, whether you're an existing principal or new principal. Now, step 2 is the professional learning plan. And again, we talked about that in a previous session, but the law requires that the PLP of a principal and AP needs to include at least one goal for growth or achievement or both. And everybody needs at least one goal related to school climate. Now, remember, those were some of our measures of success for the overall program statewide. And now it's focusing on those 3 key areas at the school level through the PLP, because this law really hones in on those 3 areas: achievement, growth, school climate. Because y'all, if we can do that well in Alabama, we're going to be in really good shape. Now, another part of the PLP, of course, is to say, this is a high quality professional learning from that state approved list that I plan to participate in to really ultimately help me meet those goals. Now, step 3 is where we're going to add the evidence of making progress towards meeting those goals. Also, evidence that will demonstrate application of new learning after I've participated in high quality PD from that state approved list. And then that 4th step, that is unique to a PLDS evaluation system. That 4th step is certification of completion. This is how principals, APs, and their supervisors are going to tell us that you've completed the program at the end of the year and you've met all the requirements for the stipend. So if you don't complete that last step, you will not receive the stipend because we won't know otherwise, right? And so that's where principals and APs, they'll come in, they'll say, I hereby certify that I've successfully completed all program requirements, or I did not meet all program requirements, or we've added a 3rd option where you can indicate I've completed the evaluation system, but I was not eligible for the stipend. And so that's something new that we have recently added. Now, the checks and balances is going to be where the supervisor comes in and says, yes, I hereby certify that this person has successfully completed all program requirements and they should get the stipend. So that's going to be our process for knowing you've completed the program and then you get the stipend. Now, let's talk a little bit about those 30 clock hours of high quality professional learning. And there is a specific requirement for elementary school administrators, because the Principal Act is tied to the Literacy Act and the Numeracy Act. So if you are a school administrator, now this includes principals and assistant principals, if you serve grades K through 3, you are required to participate in early literacy professional learning from that state approved list. And if you are a school administrator who serves K-5, you're required to participate in early numeracy professional learning from that state approved list. But it's not additional clock hours to that 30 clock hour requirement, right? It is part of it. So those clock hours count towards that at least 30 clock hours. And I do want to emphasize at least. The minimum is 30. It is completely okay to go above those 30 clock hours. All right, so if I'm a principal or AP, I need to complete those first 2 requirements. Now, if I am a newly employed first-time principal, so that means I've never been in the principalship before, my contract started on or after July 1st, I'm going to need to complete all of those steps of the evaluation system, at least 30 clock hours from that state-approved list in year 1 of a state-approved mentoring program. And we do have a state program available, Alabama New Principal Mentoring Program. We are partnering with CLASS with this. So they've helped us to develop the program and implement it. It's going very well, and it's a really good support system. I'm very proud of the work that's taken place starting this year. So this program is going to be there for 2 consecutive years. So that's why you see it says year 1. Now, those new principals who are participating in year 1 this year will also be required to participate in year 2 for next year to get this stipend. All right, so let's talk about the deadlines when it comes to this new evaluation system for our principals and APs. So at this point, all of our principals and APs would have met the deadline of completing steps 1 and step 2. That was due October 1st. Now, they have until the end of the school year to work on adding that evidence. Now, it's not due until the end of the school year. However, best practice is to go ahead and be adding evidence throughout the school year. So maybe monthly or quarterly. They'll just want to make sure once they add that evidence that they hit save at the bottom rather than submit. So they're not going to submit until the end of the school year. Now, you see two different deadlines to complete this, to add that evidence, but also to do that certification of completion step. And that's because now we have two different groups of people. We've got those who are retiring, and then at the end of the year, so they're still going to finish up the school year, but they're going to retire at the end of the school year. And then those who are not retiring. Now, the reason why there's two different deadlines is because this stipend, this one lump sum stipend, once you've successfully completed all program requirements, right, and get this one lump sum stipend, that does count towards retirement. And so for that reason, we need to know who is going to be retiring so we can go ahead and expedite that process so that they can get that stipend sooner, so that it will count towards their retirement, being the highest years of pay within the last 10. Now, everybody else technically has until the third week of June, right, to finish submitting the evidence and then to go ahead and certify. However, we highly recommend you go ahead and knock this out in May as well. And that's because the way this process is going to work is that once we've learned that everybody in the district, so all principals and APs, you've submitted your evidence, you've certified, everything's completed, then for everybody else who's not retiring, we're going to go ahead and process all those stipends so that the allocation for the rest of the stipends processed as a district. Then our finance team will send it to the district, the stipend allocation to the district, to the CSFO, who will then disperse the stipends to principals and APs, right? So I've gotten guidance from our finance folks that it's going to take 6 to 8 weeks to process those stipends. So if you go ahead and knock this out and certify and wrap it all up sooner, we can process those stipends sooner, and then principals and APs can get paid sooner. So that's why I say, yes, you technically have until the third week of June, but we highly recommend you go ahead and knock that out sooner. All right, so let's talk about the professional learning. Some reminders here. If your district is offering high quality professional learning that will meet the requirements of being state approved, and so that means it's job embedded, it's comprehensive, it's targeted towards developing their leadership capacity. It's also aligned to those new leadership standards and is aligned to the Alabama standards for professional learning. You can, your district, so a superintendent or district administrator can submit a request form to have that approved for principals and APs within the district. You can find that request form at that website that I'm going to mention again, alabamaprincipals.org. If you can please help us communicate with school administrators that this request form is not intended for school administrators to complete. This should be completed by district administrators, superintendents, and vendors. If your district is offering an ACLD PLU, reach out to me. Let's see if it's appropriate to also include towards APLDS clock hours. How do you find your clock hours? Remember, just a reminder, we're tracking those clock hours through PowerSchool Professional Learning because that is our statewide platform. So everything could be pulled through transcripts and PowerSchool Professional Learning. We'll have some more videos and screenshots about what that looks like coming out pretty soon on that website, alabamaprincipals.org. And just as a tip, if you're trying to determine whether something counts towards the state approved list, now you can find the state approved list at alabamaprincipals.org. But if you're just looking through PowerSchool Professional Learning, it is going to count on the state approved list if you see APLDS in the course title. So that's been our naming convention, to look for APLDS, and then you'll see the rest of the course title. But that's just a quick reference so that you know, yes, this is approved for the stipend. All right, so here's an update for you. So when you go to the state approved list, that's going to alabamaprincipals.org. You'll see a tab at the top that says professional learning. That's the state approved list, and we'll continue to update that throughout the year. But I do want to mention that there is a new section that says requirements for elementary school administrators. So this helps show you just make it a little bit simpler for what's required for that early literacy and early numeracy professional learning requirement. So remember, if you're K3, you need to participate in early literacy professional learning. If you're K5, early numeracy. And this is applicable to both principals and APs. Make it easier. You've got that new section. So when you go there, all you have to do is select what area you're looking for. Is it numeracy or literacy? And then it'll show you what professional learning counts towards meeting this requirement. We have recently added a course for our AMSTI to count towards that early numeracy requirement. And OMI, they're working on some additional professional learning opportunities, some virtual options as well. So that should be added soon. All right. And we also have a new credit type. This was just recently added to have just to make it really easy to track those clock hours. So yes, you can take a look at that course title, see if it has APLDS, make sure it counts towards the stipend. But just to make it even easier for you, we now have a third credit type in PowerSchool Professional Learning. So there's PLU, there's clock hours, and now there's APLDS clock hours, so that you can easily go to your transcript where select where it says credit type, to that drop down box. Principals and APs can select APLDS clock hours, and they can just see a running total for their APLDS clock hours for the year. So again, just to make it as easy on everybody as we can, so that you can see that you are making progress towards meeting at least 30 APLDS clock hours. So that's something new that we're trying to share with everybody. All right, so let's talk about this new framework. I want to show you just a little bit here. It's just an excerpt from that first standard for visionary leadership. So when you go here, when you access the slides, it'll take you to this excerpt to a PDF so that you can see some of this information. But we'll go ahead and I'll talk through some of the highlights with you now. All right, so the framework, the purpose of this framework, I apologize for reading to you, but it's just really well worded. And so I just want to read what the design team has stated the purpose of the framework to be. So it's grounded in those new leadership standards, but they want it to be a playbook to equip, develop, and empower school leaders throughout their career pathway by providing a clear and shared vision for principal leadership and an understanding of how to leverage evidence-based practices to improve outcomes for every one of our kids, right? So it really is designed to be a tool that it doesn't matter where you're at in your career. From aspiring to retiring, you can pick this up and find something for you to help deepen your capacity in your practice as a school leader. And a word I want to lift up here, I'm going to bump back one. The key word here is playbook, right? And that's what you see to the image to the side. That is intended to be a playbook. And just like with any playbook, you're not going to read it maybe and use every single play cover to cover. That is not how this framework should be used. And I say that too because once you first see it, we don't want anybody to feel overwhelmed or immediately shut down just because of the volume and length of the tool. When you look at it, when you see the finalized version, it is a 100-page document. I mean, it is really comprehensive and extensive, and we don't want anybody just to say, immediately look at that and say, oh, 100 pages. I'm not gonna. That's too much, right? I'm not gonna use that because it's designed to be a playbook. You're not gonna run every play. You're not gonna read it from cover to cover, right? You're only gonna use the pieces that are most applicable to you. So I want to talk through what those different components are and how to best use this and use it as a tool in a meaningful way. All right, so I first want to start with the guiding principles. So the 5 A's. So when this framework was being developed, these were the principles from which the team was operating. So the first is they want it to be an authoritative research. So really grounded in recent research and evidence-based practices. That's our gold standard for the field of education, right? And we wanted that to be reflected in this framework. I also want it to be achievement driven. So in service of improved student outcomes, what do we know is going to make a difference to lead to those improved academic outcomes for each and every one of our kids, which is part of that overall programmatic goal that we have. Next, the next principle is to make sure it's actionable and applicable to current context. So, given the place from which you're leading, how can it best help fill in maybe some of those gaps and needs that you've identified through your professional learning plan, through those goals, but also what are some opportunities for growth for you as a leader? Because when you take a look at those standards, those are aspirational, right? We're not going to be effective and exemplary in every single one of those areas, most likely, right? Because it's aspirational. So, what are some opportunities for growth, and how can that guide you in that professional learning? Also, we want it to be aligned. So we want it to be grounded in those leadership standards, but also reinforcing other state laws and initiatives, right? And so we had a process in place where we spoke with other sections within the State Department. So ARI, OMI, EdTech, Office of School Improvement, EL, all the different sections, MTSS coming together and saying, hey, what do you have and what resources do you have, or how are you approaching this? What are the things that you're working on that meets these standards and can complement the work that you all are doing? Because we know that principals and APs, all those different initiatives and laws, they touch the work that you do, right? And it drives the work that you do. So we wanted to really put forth an effort of aligning those different things. And then lastly, accessible, and you heard me say this earlier, it's really intended to be career-long learning. So from aspiring to retiring is something that you can pick up and use. All right, so it is aligned and grounded in those new leadership standards. So as a recap, we have 5 new standards. So we have visionary leadership, instructional leadership, managerial and operational leadership, relational leadership, and innovative leadership. And just some terminology, the law refers to those as the 5 domains of principal effectiveness, right? Because we know that the most effective principals, what do the most effective principals know and do? They attend to these 5 domains of leadership. So I also want to talk through some of that terminology. You've got the standard. So we've got 5 standards. And then we have indicators up under each of those standards to say, what are these practices to help us meet this standard? And so that's going to be labeled as A, B, C, and so forth. So you're going to see the standard, and then you're going to see each of the indicators up under each of those standards. And we have 30 indicators overall. So 5 standards, 30 indicators. Now, in the framework, what you're going to find is that for each of those indicators, there's going to be an indicator map. And that's really what I want to talk through with you today. What are those different components included in that indicator map? Well, it's going to take that indicator, and then it's going to really unwrap that professional standard and indicator. It's going to say, all right, what are the key concepts and those critical skills that a leader needs to know to be successful? So in other words, what do I need to know? What do I need to be able to do to really unpack that standard and that indicator? So let's take a look at an example. All right, so looking at standard 1, that's visionary leadership. So visionary leadership standard is that effective visionary leaders facilitate the development, articulation, implementation, and stewardship of a shared vision that guides the learning of every student. Now, the first indicator, indicator A, up under visionary leadership says, collaboratively develops a clear, measurable, and shared vision and school improvement plan based on the needs of all students identified through multiple sources of data. All right, so let's unpack that. This is what you're going to see in the framework. What do I need to know? What are those big ideas that are taking place within this indicator? First is vision for teaching and learning. You're going to hear that phrase and see that phrase often because that's actually language pulled directly from the law. What is the vision for teaching and learning? Do we have a clear-cut definition of what an effective teacher does in the classroom? The next key idea is something you do every year, is your school improvement plan, right? We call it the ASIP in Alabama, the Alabama Continuous Improvement Plan. So something else I want to point out here is that within the framework, you're going to see hyperlinks to different resources for you. Again, just kind of a tool where it can all be housed together. So this hyperlink actually takes you to the platform where you complete your ASIP in the eProof Strategies platform for the My Journey. All right, so those are the big ideas, right? Now let's talk about what are those critical skills that's wrapped up into this indicator. Well, first, we need to collaboratively develop that vision for teaching and learning, right? Then we need to establish a common language for when we go to discuss that vision for teaching and learning. So do we have a clear understanding, all of our faculty and staff within the school, when we say what an effective teacher does, what effective instruction looks like, what effective learning looks like, evidence of effective instruction. When we walk into that classroom, are we on the same page? Do we have that common language? Do we have that common definition? Next, another critical skill that's built up into this one is collaboratively analyzing multiple sources of data to really identify those critical needs, right? So are we looking at that student learning data from maybe our state assessments or maybe our benchmark assessments or common assessments to see what are our trends and identify our critical needs there? And then we also getting a holistic picture of what might be going on to really determine what I need to focus on most, even this year, specifically for this year when I go to develop that ASIP. So am I looking at those survey results, looking at that perception data? Am I looking at process data? So am I looking at certain programs like my after school program or certain processes like my PST process, my RTI process to say, hey, this is what's working well, this is what's not. And if it's not, I may need to include that an evidence-based strategy for that in my ASIP. Are we also looking at demographic data? So are we seeing certain trends? Are we seeing an increase in our EL population? If so, we're probably going to want evidence-based strategies targeting our EL students included in our ASIP, right? So are we, as a team, maybe our school leadership team, analyzing all those different types of data to get a complete picture of what I need to focus on most? And then we're using that information to develop that ASIP, and then we're setting those clear and measurable goals with the very specific timelines of how I'm going to address them. So you'll see with this framework, it just really unpacks what do I need to know and what do I need to be able to do. Now, another part of the framework is for each of those indicators is going to say that reflective question of, hey, where am I now? Right? So really being self-reflective of where am I now in terms of my current understanding and practice. And so for this, you're going to see 4 different levels. And this is called our continuum of practice. And there's going to be descriptors. So those 4 different levels, that's called the emerging leader. So that's the school administrator who's beginning to show some evidence of understanding. Then you have the developing leader. So that's somebody who's beginning to show evidence and starting to satisfy that indicator. Then you have that effective leader. That's where we want to be, right? That's where we're showing evidence and showing consistent progress. And then you've got that transformational leader who may be taking it to that very next level and exceeding expectations. So you have descriptors for each of those. So let's take a look at an example with that indicator A, right? And so how we encourage you to approach this framework is to start first with an effective leader, right? So starting first with that, bump back to that level 3, effective leader, reading those descriptors and principals and APs reflecting, hey, does this best describe me? If not, let me bump back one to developing and see if this best describes me. If not, let me bump back another one to emerging. But if I'm reading through effective, that's my starting point, right? And I'm like, yeah, that this is me. Then we encourage you to take a look at transformational to see if that's even a better fit in terms of these descriptors. So that's how we encourage you to approach this continuum of practice. Start with effective and then work your way to the left or to the right. So it helps you to think, where am I now? Well, you can also use this continuum of practice to see a clear target of where do I want to be, right? So I can look at this and say, well, if I'm developing, what do I want to be? I want to be effective. I want to go to that very next level. So here's a clear target of what I need to be doing. It's a way for you to consider what are some areas of strength and opportunities for growth. So that can be part of the conversation between the school administrator and his or her supervisor of looking at the continuum and saying, yeah, okay, you're developing here. Here's an opportunity for growth to take it to the next level. It can really help you pinpoint what you want to focus on in terms of your professional learning and those PLP goals for the school year. And it can be used as an opportunity for supervisors to provide actionable feedback, right? And regarding performance and improvement. So again, now we're looking at that continuum of practice, and now we're really looking at this with a twofold approach. Where am I now? But then where do I want to be? So if I'm emerging, how can I get to that very next level of developing? If I'm developing, how can I get to effective? And then, so forth. So how can I get to that very next level? We'll also continue with that question of asking, well, how will I get there? So if I'm looking at where am I now? I'm developing. Where do I want to be? I'm effective. Well, how am I going to get there? Well, there's going to be some example strategies that you can put into place to help deepen your practice and grow in that particular area. And there's some example evidence of growth, right? So this is a really good resource that you can use to look at your PLP, use that to design that PLP, but also to go ahead and take a look at some possible PLP evidence, right? And then we'll also have some examples of ways that school administrators, supervisors can help deepen your capacity, help provide that support. And then for some of those strategies, we're going to provide just some extended resources, tools, maybe protocols in the appendix, but you're not going to see that listed for each of the strategies, but you will for some. And that's really why all these different elements come into play, why you see why it's such a large and comprehensive document. All right, so here's an example. I know it's challenging to read, but you can see it when you go to that PDF link. But let's say I am thinking through that question. I'm developing and I want to be effective. How will I get there? You see those example strategies listed out for you. Some example evidence of growth. You're going to see some hyperlinks, right? Some things that we've pulled from other sections, some of the resources and tools that they're already using. But kind of the key takeaway here, when we're thinking about how will I get there, if we're wanting to go from emerging to developing, you're really focused on developing and building up your awareness and beginning to apply that new learning in that particular area. If you're developing and want to get to effective, you're really focusing on intentionality and consistency. And if I want to move from effective to transformational, I really want to focus on capacity building of others and inclusivity of others. So an example being, we're not the only one on our campus who are making certain decisions or developing that ASIP or looking at our most critical needs. We're inviting others in the school community, right, to come in and have that conversation with us. So it's not just insular to our school or maybe just our admin team, but we're really inviting that inclusivity of other stakeholders and building up that capacity of others. So I'm building up those structures as a school leader so that those structures and processes are in place even when I leave, right? That's what a transformational leader does. And then if we're transformational, maybe we're focusing on sustainability. So how are we coming back and doing that temperature check to make sure, okay, this practice is still in place? And if anything has come up, any challenges and problems, that we're addressing that. And then we're going back to those transformational practices. So really just monitoring that practice and making sure we're sustaining that. And then here's what it looks like for indicator A, some examples with how supervisors can support principals and APs. They can provide them ASIP timelines and deadlines, maybe a needs assessment protocol, maybe support in looking at that data, analyzing it for trends, and determining the things that are most critical to work on. And then the appendix you'll see in the excerpt, let's say I want to work on creating a vision, right? We talked about that vision for teaching and learning. Well, there's a protocol step by step of what you can do, and it's hyperlinked there for you within the document too, and it's included at the back in the appendix. So once the framework is finalized, where can you find it? Well, alabamaprincipals.org, you'll see a tab at the top that says framework. it'll be included there. And just be on the lookout for professional learning opportunities to start sharing this framework and then what it means and how it can be used. We also have some sessions coming up in October for our school administrators to also get into the framework and how it can be used to increase their effectiveness. And then let's talk about just some next steps and what we should be doing at this point. We can make sure that all school administrators within your district are developing their understanding and awareness of this new law and this new program, making sure they know who the district point of contact is in case they have any questions or concerns, just so that we're streamlining that communication and we're all on the same page, and just really trying to avoid they are maybe somebody asks me a question and asks you a question, and maybe there's different answers there, or just really trying to avoid that confusion if we can just streamline that. And so every superintendent has decided who's going to be that district point of contact. Some superintendents have decided that they want to be that point of contact. So it'd be very helpful if you can communicate that information to your principals and APs so they know who to ask. All right, if you can make sure that those staff positions are in EdDur correctly, because that's just one component, remember, we're looking at to see as we're developing that eligibility list to see if you are included as a principal or AP in EdDur. But remember, also looking at those financial records for the LEAPS reports that are submitted to the State Department every year in October. So just making sure that it's, and this is part of our FAQ, but that coded as a principal AP in those LEAPS reports. And then if you have any questions or CSFOs have any questions, they can, of course, reach out to our great finance team and they can help support you in that way. And if there are any changes to your school administrators, if you'll just keep me in the loop, that's just going to be helpful in terms of record keeping on my end. And again, if you can just share that session information with your school administrators, and if we have professional learning opportunities that come up later in the year for that framework that I mentioned, if you can share that information with them as well, that would be helpful. All right, and I shared this document last time, but we do have a timeline, and that shows all the APLDS program requirements and says, hey, this is what we should be doing if you are a superintendent or district contact, or if you're a school administrator, just making sure we're keeping up with all the requirements and the appropriate deadlines. So that's an available tool and resource for you as well. And if there's anything that I can do to help support you in the implementation of this new law and program, please don't hesitate to ask. I really appreciate all that you're doing to support our school administrators with this year, because I know it's a lot, and I know it's a lot to learn, and it's just new for everybody. And so please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions or concerns whatsoever. We can talk through it and problem solve if we need to. All right, thank you again for taking the time to join me today, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.